You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 17th of May. Protest as Radtock in Somerset dumps St George's flag, as it will offend Muslims. Farage's warm welcome north of the border. All but one escaped jail for her years of hell. Muslim men wed teen converts by phone. Hollande calls for Euro government and Bonino wants United States of Europe. Bulgarian truckers block Turkey border again. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Israel hints at new strikes, warning Syria not to hit back. Now I understand, Syrian oil becomes fault line in war. Teacher accused of blasphemy in Egypt released on bail. Thought for the day, Winnie was right. And finally, help, interpreter needed in Tower Hamlets. UK news. Protests as Radtock Somerset dumps St George's flag, it will offend Muslims. Protesters from the newly formed Raise the Flag for Radtock will meet outside the Radtock Museum in Radtock, Somerset on Saturday 18th of May 2013 for a peaceful protest against Radtock Town Council's decision not to purchase a St George's flag for the town. According to This Is Somerset, they have been enraged by comments made by Councillor Alina Jackson. She felt that the George flag was inappropriate given its links to anti-Islam campaigns between the 11th and 16th centuries while the council was deciding which flags to purchase. Councillor Alina Jackson, Labour, Radtock, a university lecturer and teacher, said its use during the Crusades of the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries could mean the English national flag could be seen by some as offensive. She added, "My big problem is that it is offensive to some Muslims, but even more so that it has been hijacked by the far right. My thoughts are that we ought to drop it for 20 years. She suggested the Union flag was a more inclusive and suitable way of displaying national pride. The council will also be flying the In Bloom flag at the Miners' Memorial Garden to celebrate the town's achievements in the gardening competition and the rainbow flag of the symbol of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender pride movements at appropriate times of the year." John Clements, Vice President of National Patriotic Group the Royal Society of St George, branded the decision nonsense and said censoring of the national flag played into the hands of the far right. A spokeswoman for the Muslim Council of Britain said it encouraged the flying of the St George's flag. She said, "St George needs to take his rightful place as a national symbol of inclusivity rather than a symbol of hatred. St George actually lived before the birth of Islam and should not be associated with any hatred of Muslims." The Bristol Muslim Cultural Society said that all the Labour councillor had done was to gift a propaganda coup to extremist groups like the English Defence League. The town council has insisted that practical considerations and the cost of extra flags were the major factor behind its decision. A World at 8 writer says, "Occasionally I have to agree with the sentiments expressed, not because they claim to play into the hands of the so-called far right, but because it demonstrates the manner in which the media and politicians manipulate the news to their own ends. The media and politicians label themselves all-inclusive and multicultural, except when it comes to British patriots. And it is especially true of this Labour councillor. Besides, the St George flag has been adopted by footballers in the UK as well." Farage's warm welcome north of the border. The UKIP leader Nigel Farage has condemned the Fascist Scum who forced him to take refuge in Edinburgh's Cannons Gate pub and hung up on a BBC Scotland interview over outrage at the hatred in its questioning. The leader of the UK Independence Party said that the excesses of Scottish nationalism can be pretty ugly and deeply unpleasant after he was surrounded and hassled by hardline demonstrators yesterday. The fact that 50 yobbo fascist scum turn up and aren't prepared to listen to the debate, I absolutely refuse to believe is representative of Scottish public opinion, Mr Farage said. The incident in Edinburgh on Thursday rattled Mr Farage as he was given media interviews. He was left stranded in the middle of Edinburgh's Royal Mile, surrounded by around 50 nationalists and socialists, calling him a racist, demanding that he go home to England. Mr Farage had to be escorted from the Canonsgate pub in a police van after angry confrontations on Thursday. He spoke to BBC Good Morning Scotland about his ordeal, but ended up leaving the phone call early in protest at their line of questioning. World at 8 says, oh dear, poor old Farage being called a racist when he's run his entire campaign in the UK on being anti-racist. Oh well, coals to Newcastle and all that, now he knows what we have to put up with. All but one escaped jail for her years of hell. Enkarta Balapovi, 54, a butcher, who forced an Indian woman into modern-day slavery and raped her, was jailed for 11 years today. He subjected the 39-year-old to 4 months of sexual abuse behind his wife's back, while forcing his victim to sleep on the floor of his single-room flat. He forced the woman to cook and clean for him and threatened to burn her passport unless she stripped naked and performed sex acts. The illiterate woman had been lured to the UK with the promise of work as a nanny, hoping to earn money for her poverty-stricken family in India. World at 8 says, butcher who forced an Indian woman into modern-day slavery and repeatedly raped her is jailed for 11 years. It does make a good headline, doesn't it? Shamina Yousuf, 33, had first recruited the woman when she came to the UK in 2005 to earn money for her family in Hyderabad, India. The woman's passport was seized by Yousuf as soon as she arrived, and the woman, who is now wheelchair-bound, was passed between 3 families as a dog's body and sex slave, earning just £2,300 for years of gruelling work. The woman was passed between the Yousufs, the Obhrais and the Balapovas, and found herself locked indoors and forced to work 16 hours a day during a 4-year ordeal at their hands. Shashi Obhrai, 54, held the woman as a sex slave for her husband, Balram Obhrai, 59, and threatened her with a knife when she tried to escape. Yousuf was convicted of ABH and ordered to carry out 40 hours unpaid work. Balram Obhrai has been accused of trafficking and making threats to kill, but the prosecution offered no evidence against him because he has a brain tumour and is on his deathbed at home. Obhrai was given 18 months in prison for ABH and 20 months in prison for making threats to kill, with both sentences running concurrently and suspended for 20 months. Despite dubbing Obhrai as wicked, Judge Shani Barnes spared her a jail sentence because she is the primary carer for her terminally ill millionaire husband. And still the woman was denied justice, as all but one escaped jail for her years of hell. Yup, butcher who forced an Indian woman into modern-day slavery and repeatedly raped her is jailed for 11 years does make a good headline. All of those involved should be deported immediately. The sole carer for a millionaire is absolute crap. He can afford anyone. Get rid of them all now. What compensation will this poor Indian woman get for being in a wheelchair? Make the millionaire pay a huge amount and then get rid. Nationalist justice at its best. European news. Muslim men wed teen converts by phone. French police have charged 7 men with removing a child from her parents' care after a 15-year-old convert to Islam, whose father is British, left home after marrying a 28-year-old Muslim man over the phone. The charges were brought in an investigation by police in the eastern French town of Mulhouse, in a shady online scheme which put Muslim men in contact with young girls who are newly converted to Islam. After being introduced, the men then marry the young girls online and over the phone. The scheme came to light earlier this month after a 15-year-old girl, whose father is British, ran away from home to live with an older Muslim man. The girl had recently converted to Islam along with 3 girlfriends aged 17, 18 and 19, without her Christian parents' knowledge, after frequenting social network internet sites. The girl, who told investigators this was her second marriage after being denounced and rejected by her first husband, has since returned home to live with her parents in Mulhouse, while prosecutors carry out their investigation. Her husband, himself a convert to Islam, has been remanded in custody in Mulhouse, a town 100 kilometres from Strasbourg and next to the Swiss border. Among the 7 being held is a man from Moulins, central France, who is suspected of being the ringleader of a scheme. World at 8 says it sounds a lot like Nika Muta as reported on Monday, and although in France they are still obviously targeting British girls. Hollande calls for Euro government and Bonino wants United States of Europe. French President François Hollande has called for the creation of a Eurozone government as a solution to the widespread recession that threatens the very identity of Europe. Hollande spelled out his views on Europe during a 2.5-hour-long press conference in Paris on Thursday, 16th of May, after being accused of lacking leadership and vision for the EU project. Hollande said that economic government for the Eurozone with its own budget, right to borrow and harmonised taxes is the only way out of economic slump. It is my responsibility as leader of a founding member of the European Union to pull Europe out of the lethargy that has gripped it, Hollande said. If Europe stays in the state it is now, it could be the end of the project, he warned. Hollande said he can imagine the new structures, which would require change to the EU treaties, to come into force within 2 years. But Italy's Foreign Minister Emma Bonino has called for a United States of Europe. I am a confirmed federalist and so is this government, Bonino said on Wednesday. Our objective remains the United States of Europe and a system that guarantees major results and also savings in the area of defence, research, major infrastructure and obviously foreign policy. I believe that the Italian presidency of the EU in the second half of 2014 will be an important opportunity to push for this, she said. Bonino was speaking to the House and Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. Bulgarian truckers blocked Turkey border again. Bulgarian truck drivers blocked on Thursday the EU country's 2 major border checkpoints with Turkey for a second time in a week to protest lengthy customs procedures on the Turkish side, state BNR radio reported. A 10-kilometre, 6-mile queue of trucks built up at the main Kapitan Andreevo checkpoint on the Bulgarian side, with another 5-kilometre long line at the smaller Lesovo checkpoint further north, the radio said. There were also thought to be lengthy build-ups on the Turkish side of the border, a major crossing point for goods from the Middle East going into Central Europe, and for EU goods going into non-EU Turkey and beyond. Drivers and truck owners are protesting the hurdles for their business on the other side of the border and unfair competition. They complain from unfounded restrictions such as not allowing into Turkish territory trucks carrying over 500 litres of fuel or making drivers wait at the Turkish border for days. One of the transport company owners, Georgi Donchev, was quoted as saying earlier that Bulgarian state must do something to protect their business and income as they provide jobs and have families to feed. Donchev informed that he had access to a letter signed by the Turkish customs chief asking subordinates to conduct stricter checks of foreign vehicles, particularly Bulgarian ones. He explained drivers were often forced to resolve their problems through bribes. Belly of the beast. Now I hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, who speaks about the third part of his report on UKIP, amongst other topics.
In my last 2 broadcasts, we examined the media-hyped rise of UKIP and the things the BNP needs to do, both to weather the storm created by such a competitor and to reach out to the disillusioned 60% of voters who, despite the Farage mirage, still remain disillusioned with politics. In this third and final broadcast of this mini-series, I want to reassure those of you who are still, understandably, worried about the growth of the UKIP safety valve. So let's move on to examine what we can do to and with UKIP to turn the whole thing to our advantage. UKIP's high-profile licensed rebellion is politicising and attracting significant numbers of new people. Some we would have reached, but others were not in any case ready to come to us. Many middle-class types in particular won't realise the need for radical economic change, particularly breaking the obscene greed and power of the banksters' fiat money conjuring trick, until the super rich and the broken system destroy their relatively comfortable life and steal their pensions. As I said in part 1 of this article, quote, there's enormous scope to use the internet to inject a starter culture of genuine nationalist ideology and political awareness into UKIP in a way that old-fashioned purges against physical entryism will be powerless to stop, unquote. It will only, for example, take a few of UKIP's rank and file who have heard about common purpose for them to spread the word to the rest, and they'll go and look. Then, online, it's only a few click links from common purpose to the Frankfurt School and the war by the left and their capitalist puppet masters against our people. It's not far from there to genuine ethnic nationalism. There's not a million internet links from common purpose to the bankster swindle, just a couple of clicks from common purpose to the Bilderbergers, not far from the conspiratorial origins of the EU to the New World Order. It's not many clicks of the mouse or evenings trawling the web from thinking Maggie was wonderful to learning about Victor Rothschild and understanding what she really was and the devastation and the theft that she unleashed. But we don't have to sit back passively and wait for it to happen. We can and must speed up the process of the radicalisation of UKIP. We can and must take active steps to exploit the law of unintended consequences by casting ideological ground bait into the big UKIP pond that the BBC and Mr Murdoch have created for us. I'm not proposing organisational entryism on the lines of the Trotskyite militant tendency takeover bid of the 1980s Labour Party. Not only is that model impractical, in the case of a UKIP in which Farage has an iron grip, all the money, a long history of ruthless expulsion of dissidents, and a proven record of working with anti-nationalist groups such as Searchlight to identify and purge those with links with us. In addition to these insurmountable practical problems, there's also the simple, fortunate fact that physical infiltration is no longer necessary as the precursor to the spreading of subversive ideas. In the 1980s, ideas could only be spread by militants physically attending meetings, selling papers, and getting prospects to meetings in the smoky back rooms of pubs. Today, the internet short-circuits the whole process. All we need to do is to develop ways to jump-start it. A UKIP insider tells me many of the party's young apparatchiks are libertarian, neocon and pro-Zionist, but also that the party contains many traditional right-wing conservatives. These people are already sound on things like immigration, family values, etc., but suffer from what the Marxists would describe as false consciousness in terms of their mistaking monopolistic capitalism for private initiative and enterprise. The latter are fair game for us, but only after a prolonged period of step-by-step political education of the kind outlined above. Among UKIP's new voters and potential recruits, on the other hand, there are huge numbers who are already instinctively supportive of great chunks of our ideas. These are the people we most need to reach and prepare for the time when UKIP implodes, as such incoherent, mushroom growth populist protest movements always do. Indeed, there are clear signs that UKIP is even more unstable than most such parties. In part 1 of this study, written only 3 weeks ago, I predicted that, quote, there's a reasonable possibility that the real killer blow to UKIP will be delivered by Nigel Farage himself within a couple of years, unquote. His comments since the election suggest that this is now not a reasonable possibility so much as a safe bet. Farage is now openly talking about a deal with the post-Cameron Tory party, a deal which could easily see an early referendum, Nigel and some of his cronies getting safe seats, and the actual or effective destruction of UKIP as a separate party. At which point, the huge patriotic protest vote they've mobilised will be freed up for us, not least because UKIP has already destroyed the several civic nationalist splinter groups which previously used on occasion to get in our way. So for all genuine nationalists, there are only 2 realistic paths ahead. The first is to be active with the British National Party, helping us to roll out our new yet already proven approach of practical idealism within communities to build support, followed by voter registration drives to harness it. The second is for those individuals out there who, having got suckered into one of the little cliques of paid wreckers and useful idiots a couple of years ago, now either feel unable to join the BNP again, or have so blotted their copybooks that we can't possibly take them back. But they can still play a valuable role in the next stage of nationalism's long march. They should join UKIP, if necessary, under false names. Not to stand as candidates, just to do enough to be accepted as good members, and to be able to collect email addresses, and to gain enough respect within the local areas to be listened to when they give their wet behind the ears UKIP colleagues a few subtle pointers as to some of the things really going on out there in the big bad world. The internet will do the rest. If, between us, nationalists simply get on with these 2 jobs, time and the tide of fate will do the rest. The curious long-term role of UKIP in the providential order of things will then one day become clear. So don't be frightened of UKIP and don't resent their temporary success. We are merely in one stage, possibly quite a short-lived stage, of a historical journey. UKIP may look like a huge problem, but with the right approach, we will in fact discover that it's merely another opportunity in disguise. There's plenty for everyone to do, so let's get to work.
Thank you, Nick, for this very interesting report today. World news. Israel hints at new strikes, warning Syria not to hit back. For several hours on Wednesday, Israel closed Mount Hermon above, a popular tourist site in Golan Heights, after mortar shells fired from Syria landed there. In a clear warning to Syria to stop the transfer of advanced weapons to Islamic militants in the region, a senior Israeli official signalled on Wednesday that Israel was considering additional military strikes to prevent that from happening, and that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad would face crippling consequences if he retaliated. The Israeli official, who has been briefed by high-level officials on Israel's assessment of the situation in Syria, declined to be identified, citing the need to protect internal Israeli government deliberations. The precise motives for Israel's warnings were uncertain. Israel could be seeking to restrain Syria's behaviour to avoid taking further military action or alerting other countries to another military strike. That would increase the tension in an already fraught situation in Syria, where civil war has been raging for more than 2 years. American and Israeli political analysts agree that Israel has little motive to intervene in Syria's civil war, but that it is deeply concerned about the transfer of advanced weapons, as well as the danger that Mr Assad's stockpiles of chemical weapons could be used against it. World Date says, also chemical weapons and more supplied to the so-called rebels, I would think. Now I understand, Syrian oil becomes fault line in war. The province of Hasaka is the Syrian oil tank. Before the revolution, its 170,000 barrels per day accounted for more than half of the country's oil production, thus representing the backbone of those oil exports covering a third of national export revenues. Syrian oil engineers working in the province told Al Monitor that the Democratic Union Party, affiliated with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, currently controls around 60% of the oil fields, leaving the remaining 40% in the hands of several factions of the Arab opposition. Since the conflict engulfed the route of the pipelines to the refineries, however, the drills have stopped working. Despite such a fragmented context, the European Union on April the 22nd decided to lift the oil embargo on liberated regions in Syria in an attempt to support the opposition. The move, though, is likely to stir up Kurdish-Arab strife and catalyse regime raids on a region that has largely remained immune to the conflict so far. The war for control of Syria's energy resources has not even started, but mutual allegations are already circulating between the parties involved, which accuse each other of cutting power supplies and dealing with the regime. Exporting crude oil to Europe would encourage ethnic strife, but Syria's rebel-held areas urgently need to produce or import fuel, electricity and gas to meet the basic needs of the population under its control, unless the undesirable option of trading with the regime is brought back to the table. World Date says, so once again black gold and greed is at the bottom of yet another human disaster. Teacher accused of blasphemy in Egypt released on bail. Investigation continues even though school and government found no wrongdoing. A Coptic Christian teacher, Dimania Obeid Abd al-Nur, a first-year teacher, has been accused of insulting Islam in Egypt. Al-Nur, who was accused of committing blasphemy and evangelising in school, was released yesterday after posting nearly $3,000 in bail. A judge reversed a May the 11th order that the elementary social studies teacher remain in jail for 15 days after she posted bail of 20,000 Egyptian pounds, which is equivalent to $2,864 US. She awaits a court hearing next week to see if she'll be formally charged with a crime, rights advocates said. Her court hearing is set for Tuesday, May the 21st, according to court documents. The Prosecutor General's office continues its investigation. If attorneys there decide to formally charge her, prosecutors could go forward with the trial the same day. Egyptian law allows citizens to file lawsuits against anyone who has transgressed the exalted right of God. Many blasphemy cases are filed in such a manner. Thought for the day. Winnie was right. Well, it has to be said that Winston Churchill, in a text which I am going to read, was right, and he said it before Enoch. Yet another wise and foreseeing political figure, But the sad thing about this Churchill text is that it was a victim of political correctness, perhaps earlier than even we in nationalism realise. When he said this in 1899, well before the World Wars, the Serbs fighting for their homeland, and the clusterfuck that is the Middle East, and also well before the massive immigration from Islamic countries to Europe, the UK and the States. The attached short speech from Winston Churchill was delivered by him in 1899, when he was a young soldier and journalist. It probably sets out the current views of many, but expresses in the wonderful Churchillian turn of phrase and use of the English language, of which he was a past master. Sir Winston Churchill was, without doubt, one of the greatest men of the late 19th and 20th centuries. He was a brave young soldier, a brilliant journalist, an extraordinary politician and statesman, a great war leader and a British Prime Minister, to whom the Western world must be forever in his debt. He was a prophet in his own time. He died on the 24th of January 1965 at the grand old age of 90, and after a lifetime of service to his country was accorded, rightly, a state funeral. Here is the speech. How dreadful are the curses which Mohammedism lays at its votaries. Besides the fanatical frenzy, which is as dangerous in a man as hydrophobia in a dog, there is this fearful fatalistic apathy. The effects are apparent in many countries. Improvident habits, slovenly systems of agriculture, sluggish methods of commerce and insecurity of property exist wherever the followers of the Prophet rule or live. A degraded sensualism deprives this life of its grace and refinement, the next of its dignity and sanctity. The fact that in Mohammedan law every woman must belong to some man as his absolute property, either as a child, a wife or a concubine, must delay the final extinction of slavery until the faith of Islam has ceased to be a great power among men. Individual Muslims may show splendid qualities, but the influence of the religion paralyses the social development of those who follow it. No stronger retrograde force exists in the world. Far from being moribund, Mohammedism is a militant and proselyting faith. It has already spread throughout Central Africa, raising fearless warriors at every step, and were it not that Christianity is sheltered in the strong arms of science, the science against which it had vainly struggled, the civilization of modern Europe might fall, as fell the civilization of ancient Rome. Churchill saw it coming. What is amazing is the fact that us Brits, armed with this great man's thinking, and also that of Enoch Powell, have still insisted on walking right into the arms of Islam on a huge scale. There is no need for us to convert, we are almost 100% there already. I'll be quoting many of the Churchillian sayings, and one of the best that applies to life in the UK now is, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it'll eat him last." Also, "I hate Indians, they are a beastly people with a beastly religion." And last but not least, "Keep England white" is a good slogan. His lesser known quote of "I propose that 100,000 degenerate Britons should be forcibly sterilised and others put in labour camps to halt the decline of the British race" is a real doozy, and although Hitler followed almost the same lines, if we in the British National Party were to highlight this ideology, just imagine the media and lovers all fainting at the same time. We have to remember that Churchill's quote on Islam is amongst his writings on the Mahdi Wars in the Sudan, and if you recall, both Generals Gordon and Kitchener had inside knowledge of these people and their methods. The world has forgotten that old wars provide lessons for new ones, and we do have a war on our hands in this country, and in the words of Kenny Everett, my favourite comedian, and all in the best possible taste. Millions of followers of Islam have been chucked out of various other countries and have landed up thousands of miles distance in countries which, compared to theirs, are or were countries of plenty and opportunity, or else they would have gone elsewhere. There is no great historical link between Islam and the Christian churches or peoples. For many years since the Second World War, which didn't really affect Islam per se, we in the UK and Europe have been on the receiving end of millions of Muslims slithering their way into our countries with a massive agenda in mind. Remember, these people are of the hive mentality, totally unlike European and Christian peoples, and this hive mentality, whilst holding them back in their own countries, spurs them forward in the chosen countries of their choice. Churchill had great comments on communism and the Jewish people, and I will quote some later. There have been various articles on our website relating to Zionism and the Jewish people, and perhaps Churchill's saying can shed some light. I am in favour of the Jewish homeland, as I believe every culture, colour and nationality should have their own land. My beef is I don't want their land to be my land in my time. Now, the Jewish people I have no problem with. They keep themselves to themselves, they integrate and they contribute to any country they flee to. And also remember, they don't migrate whole tribes at a time, unlike Islam. They do, however, share a common denominator of financial acumen, family life and adherence to a strict religious code, which is strange to our Christian and pagan heritage. The Jewish people had lived in Germany for over 800 years and created little trouble, unlike our Muslim friends who have been over here a matter of 30 years and have created hellholes of vast areas of our country and formed little meccas everywhere they put down their baggage. Now there are storms brewing over National Socialism, Socialism, Nationalism, Communism and more. Churchill seems to have had the last word on this as far as I'm concerned, and I quote, "Lenin was sent into Russia by the Germans in the same way that you might send a phial containing a culture of typhoid or cholera to be poured into the water supply of a great city, and it worked with amazing accuracy." And first there are the Jews who, dwelling in every country throughout the world, identify themselves with that country, enter into its national life and, whilst adhering faithfully to their own religion, regard themselves as citizens in the fullest sense of the state which has received them. Such a Jew living in England would say, "I am English, I am an Englishman practising the Jewish faith." This is a worthy conception and useful in the highest degree. We in Great Britain well know that during the great struggle the influence of what may be called the national Jews in many lands was cast preponderantly on the side of the Allies. And in our own army, Jewish soldiers have played a most distinguished part, some rising to the command of armies, others winning the Victoria Cross for valour. But there is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all the others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders. Although in all these countries there are many non-Jews, every whit as bad as the worst of the Jewish revolutionaries, the part played by the latter in proportion to their numbers in the population is astonishing. And in a treatise to the Peel Commission 1937 on the Jewish homeland in Palestine, he said, "I do not agree that the dog in the manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place." But in his sack of St Albans by Boudicca he says, "We see the crude and corrupt beginnings of a higher civilization blotted out by the ferocious uprising of the native tribes. Still, it is the primary right of men to die and kill for the land they live in, and to punish with exceptional severity all members of their own race who have warmed their hands at the invader's hearth." So Churchill is actually praising nationalism in its highest form while accepting that stronger races can and do take over native populations. But this takeover doesn't apply solely to Judaism or even world Zionism, as that works in a different way, usually through financial houses and vast corporations, and doesn't immediately affect the very real case of being outbred in our own country in our lifetime by members of the Islamic faith. Look carefully at any local councils, governmental bodies and think tanks, the Home Office, armed forces, police authorities, legal establishments, medical establishments and the pharmaceutical companies, law firms and the Crown Prosecution Services, and you will find a very high proportion of Muslims in those bodies. It is no accident that whilst the West Indian and non-Muslim blacks in this country are mostly at the bottom of the business and social order, many Asians, and many of those Muslim Asians, are working their way very quickly to the top. Many have obtained titles, Lord Ahmed and Baroness Vasi. How, I fail to see, because when the British were in India did they ever obtain or were given Indian or Muslim titles? No, the Brits were wrongly or rightly opposed every inch of the way in trying to bring that country into the 19th century, although many of the systems we put in place are still in use over there now. I hope that such a fate will not await us in this country as we continue to ignore the path of Islam and its progress, with the inevitable and ghastly result for our people and our culture. The Third Reich faced no such threat in the 30s from their Jewish populations, merely the Jewish ability to make use of the ensuing poverty of the German people through the Treaty of Versailles and the terrible results that those acts entailed for them. We in this country have a much higher risk of damage from Islam than ever existed in pre-war Germany, and what are we going to do about it? If Churchill or similar were alive, the establishment would be brought into line and rules and laws would be put in place. But with our increasingly dormant and submissive society, with its diversity laws and multicultural attitudes, and the terminally lazy Brits, afraid of their jobs and homes, but obviously not of their children's futures, that job of protecting our country from these Islamic parasites seems to be fading into nothingness. Our wake-up calls are here. It is for all of us to see, if we look and notice, what is really at the heart of our land now. It's not Zionism we have to worry about, but Islam, and this problem was foreseen over 100 years ago by a brilliant and forceful statesman, Winnie Churchill. I just hope we can live up to his expectations in this, our war of the moment. I will finish on a lovely saying from him, which is why I will never be a true politician, because I give just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. I gather, young man, that you wish to be a member of Parliament. The first lesson that you must learn is that, when I call for statistics about the rate of infant mortality, what I want is proof that fewer babies died when I was Prime Minister than when anyone else was Prime Minister. That is a political statistic. And finally, what was that? Bengali, Urdu, Pashto? The Telegraph have reported that a Conservative member, Councillor Peter Goals, said some of the Bengali-speaking councillors have to translate for him so he can follow proceedings at Tower Hamlets council meetings. And town hall visitors are complaining that they are unable to follow proceedings because when challenged many councillors lose their tempers and trade insults in Bengali. This follows the trend away from speaking English has increased this year at Tower Hamlets council meetings in East London, it's been claimed. Now, one of the councillors has made an official complaint about the use of Bengali, widely spoken amongst councillors who hail from Bangladesh, in the council chamber. Councillor Abdul-Ullah claims he was insulted, but some of the English-speaking councillors and public visitors fail to realise what had happened. The Labour councillor claims he was called a Shurabacha, which means son of a pig, by a rival councillor during a heat exchange last month. The slur is extremely offensive to Muslims. Councillor Ullah said in a letter to the Council Standards Committee, "Whilst we may have our differences, councillors should afford one another courtesy in our exchanges rather than resorting to unnecessary and abusive insults." He added that he was concerned that only English should be used in council meetings. He wrote, "In my view, the use of Bengali or other languages other than in translation during public questions or petitions and so on disrupts the transparency and openness of meeting by preventing some present from understanding the exchanges taking place." Other complaints about the use of Bengali during meetings are also understood to have been received at the town hall. Councillor Gold said that Bengali is being used in a very foul manner. At a full council meeting, the language should be one that all members of the public should understand. It's a very serious problem here that a number of councillors insist on speaking in Bengali. It's not just when they get emotional, it happens a lot. A Tower Hamlets council spokesman said, "A councillor has made a formal complaint about a remark which was made in Bengali." A spokesman for the local government association said he understood the right of councillors to speak in a language other than English depended upon each local council's constitution. This presenter states, "This is a problem which will get worse the more migrants are voted on to local councils. The Brits and their own are voting them on, and they cannot see why the gradual handing over of local matters to foreigners is against their own people in the long run, and that is just ignoring the fact of the foreign ignorance of how we behave in this country. It'll only get worse. How soon before our Parliament will require on-site interpreters?" You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.